She didn't ask for love. She asked for a signature. He didn't ask questions. He just showed up. No rings. No smiles. No witnesses who cared. By the time they realized what they'd agreed to, walking away was no longer an option. Because some promises don't trap you at the beginning. They trap you once you start feeling something you were never supposed to feel. Before we continue, please subscribe and comment right away. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. Margaret sat across from a lawyer she'd met twice before. His office smelled like old books and furniture polish. She wore a gray blazer. Her hands rested flat on the mahogany desk. "I need a husband by tomorrow," she said. The lawyer, Vincent Cross, didn't blink. He was 54. Silver hair. Tired eyes. He'd been drafting wills and handling quiet divorces for 20 years. "I'm not joking," Margaret added. Vincent set down his pen. "I believe you," he said. Margaret Collier was 47 years old. She owned a mid-size architectural firm her father had built from nothing. For the last 11 months, she'd been fighting her uncle in court. Her uncle wanted the company. He had lawyers. He had time. And he had one weapon Margaret didn't expect. A clause in her father's will. If Margaret wasn't married by her 48th birthday, controlling interest in the firm would pass to her uncle's side of the family. Her father had written it 20 years ago, back when he thought marriage meant stability. Margaret's birthday was in 2 days. She had 72 hours. Vincent leaned back in his chair. "You want a legal marriage," he said. "Not a real one." "Correct. That's fraud." "Only if someone proves intent," Margaret said. "And no one will." Vincent studied her. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't begging. She was doing what she always did, solving a problem. "Why me?" he asked. Margaret looked at him carefully. "Because you're single. You're private. You don't want anything from me." "You don't know that." "I do." Vincent had been divorced for 6 years. His ex-wife remarried a dentist in Portland. His daughter barely called. He spent most nights reading case files and drinking tea that had gone cold. Margaret wasn't wrong. He didn't want much anymore. "I'll pay you," Margaret said. $50,000. We stay married for 1 year. Then we file for divorce. Quiet. Clean. Vincent shook his head slowly. "You're asking me to lie under oath. I'm asking you to help me keep what's mine." There was no pleading in her voice, just fact. Vincent should have said no. He'd built a career on doing things the right way. But he didn't say no. He said, "I'll think about it." Margaret stood. "I'll be at the courthouse tomorrow at 9, she said. "If you show up, we'll do this. If you don't, I'll understand." She left without shaking his hand. Vincent sat alone in his office for a long time after that. Margaret didn't go home. She went to her office instead. The building was empty. It was almost 8. She walked through the drafting room where her team worked. Rows of desks, blueprints pinned to walls, models of buildings they'd designed together. She'd spent 15 years building this place into something her father would be proud of. And now it might all disappear because of a line in a contract. Her assistant had left a note on her desk. "Your uncle's lawyer called again. Wants to meet." Margaret crumpled it and threw it away. She sat in the dark and looked out the window. The city lights blinked like stars that had fallen too close to the ground. She thought about Vincent. She didn't know him well, but she knew enough. He was honest. He was cautious. He was alone. And tomorrow, she'd find out if that was enough. Vincent went home. He lived in a narrow townhouse with creaky floors and too many books. He made tea. He didn't drink it. He sat at the kitchen table and thought about Margaret's offer. $50,000. That wasn't why he was considering it. He didn't need the money. What he needed, what he hadn't admitted to anyone, was to feel like something in his life still mattered. His work had become mechanical. His marriage had ended without a fight. His daughter called twice a year and sounded relieved when he kept it short. Vincent had become the kind of man people forgot about. Margaret hadn't forgotten him. She'd walked into his office and asked for help. Not because she liked him, but because she believed he could be trusted. That meant something. He thought about her sitting across from him. The way she didn't flinch when she said what she needed. The way she treated the situation like a business transaction. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was something else. Vincent didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, Margaret stood outside the courthouse. It was 8:50. She wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like someone attending a meeting. People walked past her. No one stopped. At 8:58, she checked her phone. No messages. At 9, she looked up. Vincent was walking toward her. He wore a gray suit. He carried a folder. Margaret felt something she didn't expect. Relief. Vincent stopped in front of her. "I brought the paperwork." He said, "Thank you." They stood there for a moment. Neither of them smiled. "Are you sure about this?" Vincent asked. Margaret nodded. "Are you?" Vincent didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Let's go inside." The ceremony took 11 minutes. A clerk read from a script. Margaret and Vincent signed forms. 2 courthouse employees acted as witnesses. No one took pictures. No one cried. When the clerk said, "You may kiss," Margaret and Vincent shook hands instead. The clerk didn't care. She stamped the papers and handed them a certificate. "Congratulations," she said. It sounded automatic. Margaret folded the certificate and put it in her bag. They walked outside together. The sun was bright. The air smelled like exhaust and coffee. "I'll have my lawyer send the contract," Margaret said. Vincent nodded. They stood on the courthouse steps like 2 people who just finished a business deal. Because that's what it was. "I should get back to the office," Margaret said. "Right." She started to walk away. Then she stopped. She turned back. "Thank you," she said. Vincent looked at her. "You don't have to thank me." "I do." Margaret left. Vincent stayed on the steps for a few more minutes. He looked down at his left hand. There was no ring. He hadn't expected one. But for some reason, he noticed the absence. Margaret's uncle found out by noon. His lawyer called. Margaret let it go to voicemail. She listened to it later. "We're aware of your recent marriage. This doesn't change anything. We'll see you in court." Margaret deleted the message. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Everything okay?" she asked. Margaret looked up. "Everything's fine," she said. Her assistant didn't look convinced, but she nodded and left. Margaret sat back in her chair. She'd done what she needed to do. The company was safe. For now. But as she stared at the marriage certificate on her desk, she felt something strange. Not regret. Not relief. Something quieter. Something harder to name. Vincent returned to his office. He had 3 appointments that afternoon. He got through them on autopilot. When the last client left, he closed the door and sat in silence. He thought about Margaret, about the way she'd looked at him on the courthouse steps, like he'd done something worth remembering. He didn't know if that was true, but it had been a long time since anyone had looked at him that way. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. "Dinner tomorrow. We should talk logistics." "Margaret." Vincent stared at the message. He thought about ignoring it. He thought about saying no. Instead, he typed back, "What time?" The response came fast. 7. I'll send the address. Vincent set his phone down. He didn't know what he'd just agreed to, but he knew one thing. This wasn't over. The restaurant Margaret chose was quiet, low lighting, small tables, the kind of place where people went to talk, not to be seen. Vincent arrived first. He sat near the back and ordered water. He felt strange, not nervous exactly, but aware of himself, of the space, of what this was. Margaret arrived at 7:03. She wore jeans and a sweater. Vincent had never seen her in anything casual before. She looked different, softer, maybe, or just tired. "Sorry I'm late," she said as she sat down. "You're not." Margaret glanced at the menu, then set it aside. "I already know what I want." The waiter came. They ordered. Margaret got salmon. Vincent got pasta. Neither of them ordered wine. When the waiter left, Margaret pulled out a folder. "I had my lawyer draft a postnuptial agreement," she said. "It outlines everything. Financials, duration, separation terms." She slid the folder across the table. Vincent didn't open it. "You don't want to read it?" Margaret asked. "I trust you." Margaret blinked. She hadn't expected that. "You shouldn't," she said. "Why not?" "Because you don't know me." Vincent leaned back. "I know enough." Margaret studied him. She wasn't used to people taking her at her word. Most people in her life had conditions, questions, doubts. Vincent just sat there, calm and certain. It unsettled her. "We should go over the basics anyway," she said. Vincent nodded. Margaret opened the folder herself. "We'll stay married for 1 year. After that, we file for divorce. You get $50,000 at the 6-month mark. Another 50 at the end." "That's more than you said." "I changed my mind." Vincent didn't argue. Margaret continued. "We don't have to live together, but we should be seen together occasionally. Dinner once a month. Maybe a few public events. To make it look real." "Yes." Vincent thought about that. "What if someone asks questions?" he said. "We tell them the truth." "Which is?" Margaret hesitated. "We got married," she said. "That's all they need to know." Vincent didn't push. The food arrived. They ate in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable, just quiet. After a few minutes, Margaret spoke again. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why did you say yes?" Vincent set down his fork. He thought about the question. "I don't know," he said finally. Margaret frowned. "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Margaret looked at him carefully. She realized something. Vincent wasn't lying. He genuinely didn't know why he'd agreed. And somehow, that made her trust him more. "What about you?" Vincent asked. "Why me?" Margaret didn't hesitate. "Because you're not interested in taking anything from me." "How do you know?" "I just do." Vincent smiled a little. "That's not an answer either." Margaret almost smiled back. "Almost." "Fair enough," she said. They finished eating. When the check came, Margaret reached for it. Vincent didn't fight her. Outside, they stood on the sidewalk. The air was cool. The street was busy. "I'll see you next month," Margaret said. Vincent nodded. Then he said, "You don't have to do this alone." Margaret looked at him. "Do what?" "Whatever you're carrying." Margaret's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes shifted. "I've been doing it alone for a long time," she said. "I know." Margaret turned and walked toward her car. Vincent watched her go. He didn't know why he'd said that, but he meant it. 3 weeks passed. Margaret and Vincent didn't speak. Margaret's court case moved forward. Her uncle's lawyers tried to challenge the marriage. They couldn't prove anything. Margaret's lawyers sent updates. Everything was holding. The company was safe. Margaret should have felt relieved, but she didn't. She kept thinking about what Vincent had said. You don't have to do this alone. She didn't know what to do with that. Vincent went back to his routine. Work, home, sleep. But something had changed. He thought about Margaret more than he expected to, not in a romantic way. Just thought about her. He wondered if she was okay. He wondered if she had anyone to talk to. He wondered if she ever let herself stop. One evening, he texted her, "How are you?" Margaret didn't reply for 2 hours. When she did, it was short. "Fine. You?" "Same." Vincent stared at the message. He almost left it there. Then he typed again. "If you want to talk, I'm around." Margaret read the message. She didn't know what to say. So she didn't say anything. But she didn't delete it either. The first public event was a gallery opening. Margaret's firm had designed the building. She needed to be there. And she needed to be seen. Vincent met her outside. He wore a dark suit. She wore black. They looked like a couple. Polished, coordinated, distant. Inside, people greeted Margaret warmly. She introduced Vincent as her husband. No one asked questions. A few people looked surprised, but they smiled and moved on. Vincent stayed close to her. Not too close. Just there. Margaret noticed. At one point, an older man approached. He owned a competing firm. "Margaret," he said, "I heard about your father's company. Congratulations on keeping it in the family." His tone was sharp. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Thank you," she said evenly. The man glanced at Vincent. "And who's this?" "My husband." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How convenient." Vincent stepped forward slightly. "Convenient or not," he said, "it's none of your business." His voice was calm, but there was weight behind it. The man blinked. Then he laughed awkwardly and walked away. Margaret looked at Vincent. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." They stood there for a moment. Margaret felt something unfamiliar. Gratitude, maybe, or something close to it. "Thank you," she said quietly. Vincent nodded. They stayed at the event for another hour. Then they left together. Outside, Margaret stopped. "Do you want to get coffee?" she asked. Vincent looked at her. "Sure." They found a diner 2 blocks away. It was late. The place was nearly empty. They sat in a booth by the window. Margaret ordered decaf. Vincent ordered tea. They didn't talk right away. Margaret stared at her cup. "I don't do this," she said. "Do what?" "Ask for company." Vincent didn't say anything. Margaret continued. "I've spent most of my life alone. By choice." "Why?" Margaret thought about that. "Because it's easier," she said. "No one can disappoint you if you don't expect anything." Vincent understood that. More than he wanted to admit. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Margaret looked up. "Sometimes." She paused. "Do you?" Vincent nodded slowly. "Yeah." They sat with that. 2 people who'd built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. "I don't know how to do this," Margaret said. "Do what?" "Be married, even if it's not real." Vincent leaned forward slightly. "Maybe we just figure it out as we go." Margaret looked at him. "That simple." "Maybe." Margaret didn't believe him, but she wanted to. They started meeting more often after that. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Once a week, sometimes twice. Coffee, dinner, walks through the park. They talked about small things. Work, books, the city. They didn't talk about the marriage. It hung between them, unspoken. But it didn't feel heavy anymore. One evening, Margaret told Vincent about her father. How he'd built the firm from nothing. How he'd worked himself to exhaustion. How he died at his desk, alone, at 63. "I don't want to end up like that," she said. Vincent didn't offer empty comfort. He just listened. "I think you're already different," he said finally. "How?" You're here. Margaret looked at him. She didn't argue. Vincent told her about his daughter, how they used to be close, how she'd stopped calling after the divorce, how he didn't know how to fix it. Have you tried? Margaret asked. Not really. Why not? Vincent shrugged. I don't want to force it. Margaret leaned back. Sometimes people need to know you're willing to try. Vincent thought about that. Maybe. Margaret didn't push, but she planted the seed. 2 months into the marriage, something shifted. It was subtle. Vincent started noticing things about Margaret. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she paused before answering difficult questions. The way she smiled, really smiled, when something surprised her. Margaret noticed things too. The way Vincent listened without interrupting. The way he never made her feel like she had to explain herself. The way he showed up. Every time. Neither of them said anything about it, but they both felt it. One night, they were walking through the city. No destination. Just walking. Margaret stopped in front of a bookstore. Can we go in? She asked. Of course. Inside, Margaret wandered through the aisles. She picked up a novel and flipped through it. Vincent watched her. She looked relaxed, more than he'd ever seen her. Do you read much? He asked. Not anymore, Margaret said. I used to, before everything got complicated. You should start again. Margaret looked at him. Maybe I will. Vincent picked up a book from the shelf. This one's good, he said, handing it to her. Margaret took it. She read the back cover. You've read it. Twice. Margaret smiled. I'll take it. They left the bookstore together. Margaret held the book like it was something precious. And maybe it was. Not because of the story, but because Vincent had given it to her. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and thought about Vincent, about how easy it had become to be around him, about how she didn't feel like she had to perform. She thought about the way he looked at her, not like she was a problem to solve, just like she was someone worth knowing. Margaret didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. This was supposed to be simple. A contract, a solution, a year. But somewhere along the way, it had stopped feeling like a contract. And that scared her. Vincent lay awake too. He thought about Margaret's smile in the bookstore, the way she'd looked at him when he handed her the book, like he'd given her something more than paper and ink. He thought about how much he looked forward to seeing her, how the days between their meetings felt longer than they should. Vincent had told himself this was just an arrangement, a favor for someone who needed help, but he didn't believe that anymore, and he didn't know what to do about it. The next time they met, something was different. They both felt it. Neither of them said it. They sat across from each other at the same diner, same booth, same drinks. But the air between them had changed. Margaret spoke first. This is getting complicated, she said. Vincent nodded. I know. Margaret looked down at her cup. I don't know if I can do complicated. Vincent didn't respond right away. Then he said, what if we just keep going? See what happens? Margaret met his eyes. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? Margaret didn't have an answer for that. She wanted to say no. She wanted to protect herself. But when she looked at Vincent, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Hope. And she didn't want to let go of that. Not yet. Okay, she said quietly. Vincent exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. Okay, he repeated. They sat there for a long time, not talking, just being. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. Some viewers will recognize this moment, when something shifts without warning, when you realize the person across from you has become more than you planned for. This is where opinions often split. Spring arrived slowly. Margaret's court case was resolved. Her uncle dropped the challenge. The firm was officially hers. She should have celebrated. Instead, she sat in her office and felt nothing. The fight was over. But the marriage wasn't. Not yet. They still had 7 months left. Margaret thought about that. 7 months. It felt like too much and not enough at the same time. Vincent called her that evening. "I heard the news," he said. "Congratulations." "Thank you." There was a pause. "Do you want to get dinner?" Vincent asked. "I don't know if I'm good company tonight." "That's okay." Margaret smiled a little. "Okay. Where?" "Wherever you want." They met at a quiet Italian place near the water. Margaret looked exhausted, not physically, emotionally. "You won," Vincent said gently. "I know." "So, why do you look like that?" Margaret sighed. "Because I don't know what comes next." Vincent understood. Margaret had spent so long fighting for the company that she hadn't thought about what would happen when the fight was over. "You don't have to figure it out tonight," Vincent said. "I know, but I want to." Vincent leaned forward. "What do you want, Margaret?" Margaret looked at him. No one had asked her that in years. "I don't know," she said quietly. "That's okay." Margaret shook her head. "It doesn't feel okay." Vincent reached across the table. He didn't take her hand, just rested his fingers near hers, close enough that she could feel the warmth. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said. Margaret looked down at his hand. She didn't pull away. "What if I mess this up?" she asked. "Mess what up?" Margaret didn't answer, but Vincent knew what she meant. "You won't," he said. "You don't know that." "I do." Margaret looked at him. She wanted to believe him, but belief had always been hard for her. That night, Vincent walked Margaret to her car. The air was cool. The street was quiet. Margaret stopped before getting in. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why are you still doing this?" Vincent frowned. "What do you mean?" "The case is over. The company is safe. You don't have to keep showing up." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not showing up because I have to." "Then why?" Vincent looked at her. Really looked at her. "Because I want to." Margaret's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. Vincent stepped closer. Not too close. Just closer. "I know this wasn't supposed to be real," he said. "But somewhere along the way, it started to feel real. At least for me." Margaret's heart was beating too fast. "Vincent, you don't have to say anything," he said. "I just wanted you to know." Margaret stood there, frozen. She wanted to say something. She wanted to tell him she felt it too. But the words wouldn't come. Vincent smiled sadly. "Good night, Margaret." He turned and walked away. Margaret watched him go. She got in her car. She sat there for a long time, hands on the wheel, staring at nothing. Then she started the engine and drove home. Margaret didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed and replayed Vincent's words over and over. Somewhere along the way, it started to feel real. She thought about the last few months, the dinners, the conversations, the quiet moments. She thought about the way Vincent looked at her, the way he listened, the way he made her feel like she didn't have to be anyone other than who she was. Margaret had spent her whole life keeping people at arm's length. It was safer that way. But Vincent had slipped past her defenses without even trying. And now she didn't know what to do, because if she admitted how she felt, everything would change. And she didn't know if she was ready for that. Vincent didn't reach out for 3 days. He wanted to give Margaret space. He didn't know if he'd made a mistake by telling her the truth. But he couldn't take it back now. On the 4th day, his phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. "Can we talk?" Vincent stared at the message. "When?" "Now." Vincent grabbed his keys. They met at the park. It was late afternoon. The sun was low. Margaret was sitting on a bench when Vincent arrived. She looked nervous. Vincent sat down beside her. "Hi," he said. "Hi." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Margaret spoke. "I've been thinking about what you said." Vincent waited. "I don't know how to do this," Margaret continued. "I don't know how to let someone in. I've spent so long keeping people out that I don't even know where to start." She looked at him. "But I don't want to lose you." Vincent's chest tightened. "You won't. You don't know that." "Margaret, I'm scared," she said. "I'm scared that if I let myself feel this, it'll fall apart. And I don't know if I can handle that." Vincent reached for her hand. This time, she let him take it. "I'm scared too," he said. Margaret looked at him, surprised. "You are?" "Of course I am." Vincent squeezed her hand gently. "But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She didn't cry, but they were there. "I don't know if I can be what you need," she said. "You already are." Margaret shook her head. "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Vincent leaned closer. "You don't have to be perfect, Margaret. You just have to be here." Margaret looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Okay, okay, okay." Vincent smiled. Margaret smiled back. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this could work. They didn't rush after that. They took it slow. Margaret started spending more time at Vincent's house. She liked how quiet it was, how lived in. Vincent started keeping coffee at his place, the kind Margaret liked. He didn't tell her, but she noticed. One evening, they were sitting on his couch. Margaret had her legs tucked under her. Vincent was reading. Margaret was just sitting. "This is nice," she said. Vincent looked up. "What is this?" "Just being." Vincent smiled. "Yeah, it is." Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. Vincent didn't move. He just sat there, holding the moment like something fragile. But not everything was easy. Margaret still had days when she pulled back, when she got quiet and distant. Vincent learned to recognize those days. He didn't push. He just stayed close. One night, Margaret showed up at his door at 11. She looked exhausted. "Can I come in?" she asked. "Of course." She didn't explain. She just sat on his couch and stared at nothing. Vincent made tea. He sat beside her. "Do you want to talk?" he asked. Margaret shook her head. "Okay." They sat in silence for an hour. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was small. "I had a fight with my uncle today." Vincent waited. He said, "I only kept the company because I got lucky, that I didn't earn it." Vincent's jaw tightened. "That's not true." "I know." "Do you?" Margaret looked at him. "Sometimes." Vincent set down his cup. "You've worked for this your whole life, Margaret. You didn't get lucky. You fought for it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Then why does it still feel like it's not enough?" Vincent pulled her into his arms. She didn't cry, but she held on. And Vincent held her back. Vincent had his own struggles. His daughter called out of the blue one afternoon. Vincent almost didn't answer, but he did. "Dad." "Hi, sweetie." There was a pause. "I'm sorry I haven't called." Vincent closed his eyes. "It's okay." "It's not." Vincent didn't know what to say. "I heard you got married," his daughter said. Vincent blinked. "How did you?" "Mom told me." "Of course she did." "Yeah," Vincent said. "I did. Why didn't you tell me?" Vincent sighed. "I didn't think you'd care." His daughter was quiet for a moment. "I care, Dad." Vincent felt something break open in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have told you. Can I meet her?" Vincent hesitated. "You want to?" "Yeah, I do." Vincent told Margaret that night. She looked nervous. "What if she doesn't like me?" "She will." "You don't know that." Vincent smiled. I do. They met for lunch the following week. Vincent's daughter, Claire, was 31. She had her father's eyes and her mother's sharp wit. She shook Margaret's hand firmly. It's nice to meet you, Claire said. You too. They sat down. The conversation started awkwardly, but slowly it warmed. Claire asked Margaret about her work. Margaret asked Claire about hers. Vincent watched them talk. He felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. At the end of lunch, Claire hugged her father. I like her, she whispered. Vincent smiled. Me too. 6 months into the marriage, Vincent and Margaret stopped calling it an arrangement. They didn't announce it. It just happened. Margaret started keeping clothes at Vincent's place. Vincent started calling her my wife without thinking about it. One night, they were lying in bed. Margaret turned to him. What are we doing? She asked. Vincent looked at her. What do you mean? This. Us. What is this? Vincent thought about that. I don't know, he said, but I don't want it to end. Margaret looked at him for a long time. Me neither. Vincent reached for her hand. So let's not end it. Margaret smiled. That's simple. Maybe. Margaret leaned in and kissed him. It was soft, slow, careful. When she pulled back, Vincent was smiling. What? Margaret asked. Nothing. I didn't think this would happen. Me neither. They lay there in the dark, two people who'd spent so long alone, finally finding each other. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. The divorce papers sat and signed on Margaret's desk. They'd been there for 2 weeks. Vincent saw them one evening. You haven't filed, he said. No. Why not? Margaret looked at him. Because I don't want to. Vincent smiled. Good. Margaret laughed. Good. Yeah, good. Vincent walked over to the desk. He picked up the papers, and he tore them in half. Margaret's eyes widened. Vincent, if we're doing this, he said, let's really do it. Margaret stared at him. Then she smiled. Okay. Vincent kissed her. And for the first time in her life, Margaret didn't think about what came next. She just stayed in the moment. With him. Many people watching this will recognize this moment. When you realize the thing you built to survive has become the thing you want to keep. If you were in her place, what would you have done? A year passed. Margaret and Vincent moved in together. They kept both houses at first. Then they sold Vincent's and made Margaret's place their home. Vincent set up an office in the spare room. Margaret cleared space in her closet. It was small, but it mattered. One evening, Margaret came home late. She found Vincent in the kitchen. He was cooking. Something smelled good. What's this? Margaret asked. Dinner. I can see that. Vincent smiled. Sit down. It'll be ready in a minute. Margaret sat. She watched him move around the kitchen. He looked comfortable, like he belonged there, like he'd always belonged there. Vincent. Yeah. I love you. Vincent stopped. He turned around slowly. Margaret was looking at him. Her expression was open, vulnerable. Vincent set down the spoon. He walked over to her. Say that again, he said quietly. I love you. Vincent cupped her face in his hands. I love you too. He kissed her. Margaret kissed him back. When they pulled apart, Vincent was smiling. Took you long enough, he said. Margaret laughed. I know. But life wasn't a fairy tale. Even with love, there were hard days. Margaret's firm hit financial trouble. A major project fell through. She had to lay off 3 people. She came home that night and didn't speak. Vincent found her sitting in the dark. Margaret, she didn't look up. Vincent sat beside her. Talk to me. I don't want to. Okay. They sat in silence. After a while, Margaret spoke. I had to let people go today. Vincent nodded. I know that wasn't easy. It wasn't. Margaret's voice cracked. I feel like I failed them. Vincent turned to her. You didn't fail anyone. You did what you had to do to keep the company alive. That doesn't make it hurt less. I know. Vincent put his arm around her. Margaret leaned into him. I'm tired, she whispered. I know. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this. Vincent pulled back and looked at her. Then don't. Margaret frowned. What? If it's killing you, walk away. Margaret shook her head. I can't. It's my father's company. It's your life. Margaret stared at him. You don't understand. Maybe not, but I understand that you're not happy. Margaret didn't respond. Because he was right. She wasn't happy. She hadn't been happy in a long time. Margaret thought about that conversation for weeks. She thought about her father, about the company, about what she really wanted. One morning, she woke up and made a decision. She called a meeting with her senior team. I'm stepping back, she told them. They looked shocked. What do you mean? Her assistant asked. I mean, I'm promoting you to managing director. You'll run the day-to-day operations. I'll stay on as owner, but I won't be involved in the daily grind. Her assistant blinked. Are you sure? Margaret nodded. I'm sure. She felt lighter than she had in years. Vincent was proud of her. How does it feel? He asked that night. Strange, Margaret said. Good strange. What are you going to do with all your free time? Margaret smiled. I don't know yet. But she was starting to figure it out. Margaret started painting again. She hadn't painted since college. But she set up an easel in the spare bedroom and just started. Her first attempts were terrible. She didn't care. Vincent would come home and find her covered in paint. How's it going? He'd ask. Badly. Can I see? Margaret would show him. Vincent would study the canvas seriously. I like it. You're lying. I'm not. Margaret would laugh. And Vincent would kiss her forehead. Vincent reconnected with Claire. They started having dinner once a week. Sometimes Margaret joined them. Sometimes she didn't. But she was always there in the background. A steady presence. One evening, Claire pulled her father aside. You're different now, she said. How so? Happier. Vincent smiled. I am. Is it because of Margaret? Vincent thought about that. Partly. But it's also because I'm trying. Claire hugged him. I'm glad, Dad. Me too. 2 years into the marriage, Margaret and Vincent took a trip. They drove up the coast. No plan. No schedule. Just the two of them and the road. They stopped at small towns. Ate at diners. Slept in cheap motels. One night, they sat on the beach. The ocean was dark. The stars were bright. Margaret leaned against Vincent. I never thought I'd have this, she said. Have what? This. Peace. Vincent kissed the top of her head. You deserve it. Margaret looked up at him. So, do you? They sat there until the sun started to rise. Neither of them wanted to leave. But eventually they did. When they got home, Vincent asked Margaret something he'd been thinking about. Do you ever regret how we started? Margaret frowned. What do you mean? The contract. The arrangement. Do you ever wish it had been different? Margaret thought about that. No, she said finally. No. No. Because I don't think we would have found each other any other way. Vincent smiled. You're probably right. Margaret took his hand. I needed the contract to let you in. I needed the excuse. And now I don't need an excuse. Vincent pulled her close. Good. 3 years in, they renewed their vows. It was a small ceremony. Just Claire, Margaret's assistant, and a handful of close friends. They stood in the same courthouse where they'd first gotten married. But this time, it felt different. This time, it was real. The clerk read from the script. Margaret and Vincent said their vows. When the clerk said, "You may kiss," they did. And this time, it meant everything. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Margaret ran her firm from a distance. Vincent cut back on his hours. They spent more time together, cooking, reading, talking. They fought sometimes about small things, stupid things, but they always worked through it because they'd learned something important. Love wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, even on the hard days, especially on the hard days. One evening, Margaret was painting. Vincent was reading in the corner. "Vincent." "Yeah. Thank you." Vincent looked up. "For what?" "For saying yes." Vincent smiled. "Thank you for asking." Margaret set down her brush. She walked over to him. Vincent pulled her into his lap. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." They sat there in the quiet, two people who'd started as strangers, who'd become partners out of necessity, and who'd become something more out of choice. 5 years later, Margaret closed her firm. She sold it to her assistant. The decision was easy. She was done fighting. She was ready to rest. Vincent retired the same year. They sold Margaret's house, and they moved to a small town near the water. They bought a house with big windows and a garden. Margaret painted every day. Vincent read and wrote letters to Claire. They walked on the beach. They cooked together. They argued about whose turn it was to do the dishes. They lived, really lived. On their 10th anniversary, they sat on their porch. The sun was setting. The sky was orange and pink. Margaret leaned her head on Vincent's shoulder. "Do you remember that first dinner?" she asked. "Of course." "Did you think we'd end up here?" Vincent thought about that. "No," he said honestly. "But I'm glad we did." Margaret smiled. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while. Then Margaret spoke again. "I used to think love was something that happened to other people, that it wasn't meant for me." Vincent looked at her. "And now I know I was wrong." Vincent kissed her temple. "So was I." They watched the sun disappear below the horizon. Two people who'd needed each other when they didn't even know it. Two people who'd built something real out of something temporary. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you don't plan for. Margaret never regretted saying those words in Vincent's office. "I need a husband by tomorrow," because that desperate request had led her here, to this porch, to this man, to this life, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Vincent never regretted walking into that courthouse, because that one decision had changed everything. It had given him a reason to try again, to believe again, to love again. Some people will say this story is unrealistic, that love doesn't work like this, that marriages built on contracts can't become something real. But the truth is more complicated than that. Love doesn't follow rules. It doesn't care how it starts. It only cares where it goes. And Margaret and Vincent's love went somewhere beautiful, not because it was easy, but because they chose it every single day. Years later, when Claire asked her father how he and Margaret made it work, Vincent said something simple. "We showed up. That's it. That's it." Claire shook her head. "There has to be more." Vincent smiled. "There is, but it all starts with showing up." Margaret, who was listening from the kitchen, called out, "He's right. Everything else is just details." Claire looked between them. These two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, who'd built a life out of something that was supposed to be temporary, who'd proven that sometimes the best love stories are the ones that start with no expectations at all. "I hope I find that someday," Claire said quietly. Vincent pulled his daughter into a hug. "You will." Margaret walked over and joined them. "You will?" she echoed. And they stood there together, a family built not on blood or obligation, but on choice, on showing up, on love. The contract that started everything was long gone, torn up and thrown away, but the marriage remained, stronger than Margaret ever thought possible, more real than Vincent ever dared to hope. Because somewhere between the courthouse and the coffee shop, between the arrangement and the truth, between the walls and the vulnerability, they'd found each other, really found each other, and that made all the difference. If you were in their place, what would you have done? Would you have taken the risk? Would you have shown up? Many people watching this will have their own answer, but Margaret and Vincent's answer was simple. They chose each other, not once, but every day, and that's what made their story worth telling. The end.